Yo, good to see you guys. Welcome. Yo, it's Halloween.
Yes, it is.
What you want to tell the people what you're dressed up as?
I'm dressed up as Captain America. I don't know if that's.
There you go.
I
Captain
got the
America.
shield.
Yo,
Good.
we got some solid costumes out there, so make sure you stick around for the costume contest because hopefully Jeremiah doesn't win for the third year, but he tried pretty hard this year. So, but so glad you guys are here. Yo, this is week 5 of our series, and we've been having a good conversation all month long. But tonight we're going to talk about Mormonism. I got my friend Chloe up here. Can you give it up for
Hi.
Chloe? Yeah. So we're just going to have a conversation, walk through some beliefs that they have, some beliefs that we have, what that looks like, and just learn how we can have conversations with people like that. So we're going to throw up, it's like a definition slide, a few things. I'm just going to read off here. Mormons are a religious group that embrace concepts of Christianity as well as revelations made by their founder, Joseph Smith. Their primary belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or LDS, which is headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah, and has more than 16 million members worldwide. It's a lot of people. And does anyone go to Perry High School? Yeah. Like, wow, jeez. Okay, the point wasn't to trash each other's school. No, I went to Perry High School. You go to Perry High School?
Yes, I do.
And have you ever met a person of the LDS church at Perry?
Surprisingly, I've met a lot.
Surprisingly.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know about your school, but Perry has an LDS church like right across the street. So wherever you're at, it's probably a pretty predominant culture. It's a class even.
Yeah, it's called seminary.
Yeah. So you want to walk us through some of the things that they believe, and a few of these will be up on the screens as we walk through this.
Right. So the Mormons believe in 4 different books, and we really only believe in one, which is the Bible. They believe in the 4, which is the Holy Bible, the Doctrine and the Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, and then the Book of Mormon, which is their main one. For their Sunday class, they have different classes that change from each Sunday. So you can go to a group like that's for your age group, or you can go for your gender. Like they switch it up every Sunday. They also believe that the Trinity is 3 separate people as opposed to all in one like we do. So they believe that we're ruled by 3 separate gods. They also believe that people like God can go through a process while they're here on Earth, and when they die, become a god and rule their own planet.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. To get there, you have to work on perfecting yourself throughout your life and also have good faith, and that's how you become your own ruler of a planet, basically. And the ways you can perfect yourself are kind of probably what you guys have heard, which is they don't drink coffee. You have to give 10% of your income to the church, worship Joseph Smith. And also one I found was a little weird was you're not supposed to question your leaders. You kind of just go with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think the don't question your leaders one's guys, if you ever have a question here about what we do, come talk to me. Come talk to Don. Come talk to Matt. Come talk to us. We're not a group that's going to shy away from having hard conversations, asking hard questions. And I've heard different things about income. As Christians, we believe we should tithe, give of our first. But I've heard some, I don't know what the best way to say it, but some more intense language when it comes from the LDS church of they check up on that. They're like, hey, you had 8% last month. What's up with that? You'll never get that from a church like this. We're not all up in your business. For us, it's a heart thing. For them, it's a doing the thing. So those are pretty big differences. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in high school, hearing the word oh, I'm part of this ward and this stuff, it was just stuff I never really knew. And even now, until preparing for this, I was okay, I know it exists, but what is it? So this stat and little breakdown, I thought it was helpful just to understand how it works. Just as the Mormon church administration is divided into territories made up of wards and stakes, not like steaks like you eat, but the former consisting of from 500 people up to 1,000 people. Each ward is presided over by a bishop and his 2 counselors. The wards are all over consolidated into stakes, each of which is supervised by a stake president and 2 counselors, and aided in turn by 12 high priests, known as the stake high council. That's a lot. There is a lot, and like every week there's been things where I've been sitting in the seats listening to Matt and whoever's up here. I'm like, wow, that's intense. Like there's a lot more that goes on. So like every week we have 20 minutes to share an overview of what that looks like, how to have conversations with people like that. But if you're like, oh, I'm curious, like what wards are around me? Like what does that look like? Talk to people. Yeah, like don't shy away from having conversations. You want to tell us a little bit about some of the OG LDS people?
Right. So a little bit about the history was like the main founder. His name was Joseph Smith. He was born in Vermont in December of 1805. His dad was known as, he called himself an avid treasure hunter. So he was a little, yeah. He followed in his footsteps with his father and continued his treasure seeking. And in 1820, he considered himself an alleged recipient of a marvelous vision where God and the Son of God materialized to him and spoke to him when he was younger. So.
Yeah, and some of these terms, if you go do your own research or watch certain shows, like when talking about him and his father, they're going to use words like, oh yeah, these peep stones, divining rods, or they just use the words of like, hey, he was just plain digging like on a treasure hunt. So just things to keep in mind when you see these things. It's like it's part of who he was, who his dad was. So you want to share a little bit more?
Yeah. So in 1820, he claimed that he had a heavenly vision where he was basically told that he's going to become the next prophet of God and Jesus and lead this new generation to stuff. But it wasn't until 1823 when an angel appeared to him and told him where to find the golden tablets or golden plates to where he could then translate those plates into become the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And another person, you guys ever heard of any schools up in Utah? Utah, BYU. You ever heard of BYU? No? Okay, 3 of us. There was a person, Brigham Young. So a little bit background of him. He was the 2nd president of the Mormon Church. He accepted the doctrine of plural marriage. He took 55 wives and fathered at least 47 children. He founded Salt Lake City, first governor of the Utah Territory. And they had names for him like Lion of the Lord or American Moses. And then they named BYU after him. So there's so much background, but we're going to look at, we have the Bible and they have the Book of Mormon, so we're going to look a little into that. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Bible, well, I'm assuming a lot of you know about it.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
If not, go to Don's house.
Right. The Bible is mainly focused on the works of and the life of Jesus and his prophets and all that stuff, and it's based in the Middle East. And it covers the history from God's creation of earth all the way up until AD 100, while the Book of Mormon is mainly primarily in the Americas, and it tells from 1,000 years that dates back to 600 BC to AD 400. And the Bible has 66 books, and it believes in worshiping Jesus and God, while the Book of Mormon only has 15, and they're more into worshiping their founder, which is Joseph Smith. Yeah, and the Bible also states that Jesus is part God and God in flesh, while the Book of Mormon says that Jesus is just a man with he's the first guy to have a spiritual body. They also claim that Jesus is not God and that his brother is the devil. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah. And guys, I think one of the coolest things to start when you start grasping Christianity, that we have a God that said, hey, I'm going to send my son that is fully man, that will fully experience everything you're going to experience, but live without sin, but also while being fully God. Like when you think about that, like how does someone like us, just a couple thousand years ago, walk through the same struggles of being tempted, living normal life, but lived without sin completely, and then at the same time, he's still God. It's one of the craziest things. And we've got it up on the screen, just a little bit more background of what the Book of Mormon is. It's a sacred book of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, believed by the members of the church to be an abridgment by a prophet of a record of a certain ancient peoples in America, written on golden plates and discovered and translated by Joseph Smith. It's something that I was pretty excited once I knew we were doing this whole month long, this conversation, because it was something that I went to Perry. So it was a everyday conversation, or hey, what is this like? And I would ask questions. And then I had one of my best friends, Grandpa, he studied it a ton. I was like, wow, like that, like it was just super intriguing. So we would go up to their cabin in Payson, but from Chandler to Payson, it was just sometimes 2 hours of just him spilling knowledge. And I was like, wow, that'd be really cool to fully understand like that eventually. But so have conversations with people that have studied it. Have people that are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Have conversations with people that, hey, I was raised like that. Talk to people and ask them what their experiences are. Because it's going to look wildly different. And the one thing I've noticed is that at least, like, most of them, like every person I've met that's a member of the Church of LDS, they're amazing people. Like some of the nicest people ever. So what I would say is, don't just take what we're saying. Go experience, like, God's creation. That's a brother and sister. Go talk to them. Just because they might disagree with us on some things, go experience a conversation like that. And I think as it sounds cheesy, but as you get older, you'll be able to slow it down a little bit, have more patience for a conversation that is going to be, this stuff was complicated, like doing research. Like there was, book after book, website after website of just like, hey, what is the foundation of this and what does that look like? And I've bought a house and I now have neighbors. I'm like, hey, we grew up, he went to Bash, I went to Perry. I was like, oh, and I was like, we just kept talking. I was like, what's more of your background? Like, let's just getting down to it. I was like, yeah, I've been raised in the church. He's like, oh, I was raised LDS, and it's just been like wild to like hear comments or things of stories or stories about his parents, and it's crazy. Like, it's so cool to get his experience through his life of 28 years of being in that. So yeah, talk to people. So we're going to talk a little bit about salvation, what that looks like. And for us, that's a pretty big one. For most people, that's, hey, how can I be saved? So as Chloe said a little bit earlier, for them, it's through faith, but also through good works. And you can throw up that verse slide. Ephesians 2, 8 through 9, it's a great verse. It's talking about faith. It says, God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. As you read this book and this chapter, it's a complicated thing, but at the end of the day, it's a gift. You can't give it back. It's not like something when you get for your birthday or for Christmas, you're like, I don't like that. Like, I wish you would have known better. Like, I'm going to return it. No, like, you can't give it back. And it's one of the coolest things where he's like, hey, I've paid the price. Here it is. Like, you can't give it back. And I think when you read Ephesians and you go through that, it's a great thing. It says, hey, you don't have to work for it. And that's just a beautiful reminder. So then the topic of who do they think God is? What do we think? Says, has not always been seen as a supreme being of the universe, but attained by his power, was mortal, then became God. God had a physical relationship with Mary, which is how Jesus was born. Any human can become God. That's kind of what she's saying with the planet thing. And that's a whole conversation, but just keep going. Our God was found not guilty and hung on a tree. Their God was found guilty for what his actions does. And when I'm saying that, they're the prophet they looked up to, Joseph Smith. We were preparing, and I was like, hey, Grant, you're from the Midwest. Like, tell me about this. He's like, yeah, where Joseph Smith died was, like, right down the street from, he said, like, what, 16 minutes or something? Yeah, it was just another person where I'm like, all we did was, hey, like, let's talk to somebody that's been there, had these experiences, talked with these other people, and what that looked like. Yeah, he, during a jailbreak, was assassinated, and they would say that he was martyred, but died 16 miles, like, outside of Macomb, Illinois. So you can still go there. And then we were in the office, and another person walks down, and they're like, hey, I was down in the city in Missouri, and I visited a spot where he was in prison before. And these are things I've never heard of, literally, until just having a conversation. And that's all this is. That's all these 5 weeks are just having conversations. And I don't know about you guys, but the conversation of, like, death, for myself, I've been like in situations, hospitals, funerals, like I've dealt with death about as close as I could get without dying. I've got story after story where it's just been there, and I'm used to it, and I'm ready. Like, hey, God, like whenever like your plan is your plan, like where we're going is going to be better than here. And so everyone asks, what happens when I die? They have different levels of kingdom and heaven. They do different things such as baptisms and marriages ceremonies on behalf of the dead. And it's just, these are things where giving you the peace, think about it. If you want to go, keep looking into it. Keep doing research. But those are things when you dig into death, for us, we know that if we believe in our Lord Jesus, hey, that's it. Like, we have eternal life. And Matt has touched on it throughout the weeks, and I've had a professor explain it to me of, hey, just because you get this gift doesn't mean you get to abuse it. And he said, hey, grace is designed to withstand your abuse, but it's not designed to be abused. You don't get to just treat it like a punching bag. And once he said this, I was like, okay, this is why you write books and teach at a college. Like, it makes sense. And I was like, when someone put it in that perspective for me, regardless of what you think, you don't just get to go out and do whatever you want. You're going to mess up. But the thing is, we're going to stumble and mess up even when we're striving to be the best imitator we can for Jesus. But when we say, hey, we're going off track and we're just going to live what we want, do what we do, just go crazy with sin, that's when it becomes a punching bag and it gets messy. So yeah, just because you know, and I've heard story after story of, hey, I could just say yes to Jesus later in life, right before I'm going to die. No, like, don't treat it like that. Like, there's so much more beauty to life when you live with Jesus. So think about that as you go into that conversation. But I just want to have a conversation with Chloe of just having conversations with people of the LDS church. And I kind of shared a little bit about that with my neighbor. You want to share a little bit?
Okay, so going into this message and preparing, I talked to a lot of my Mormon friends. I'm on a Mormon soccer team too, so I talked to some of them. And one of my really good friends is Mormon, and I learned a lot through that. For example, you probably shouldn't call them Mormon to their face. I don't think they like that. Well, I know they don't like that. The person he got offended a little bit.
What do they prefer?
They prefer LDS or a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Okay. So that's what you should call them. Learn that the hard way. Also, you should be confident and know what you're talking about when you're going into this. If you don't know what Christianity is or your own faith, it's not going to help you trying to discover and learn more about someone else's or helping them get to know your Jesus if you don't even know him.
Yeah, and our goal, I don't want you to get into a conversation where you just get confused. Like, that's not the goal. It's where you're like, I don't know what they said or they said, like, I don't know what's right. Do your research on both sides of anything we've talked about for the last 5 weeks. You're like, hey, well, I was kind of curious about this. Go dig into it. Come back to whoever shared about that. Be like, hey, I have questions. I've shared about this time when I was in class with 3 other people we were wildly different. But the person that this girl cannot stand at all was just because he was being a jerk. Like, when you go into a conversation with someone of any other religion, being a jerk, backseat. Like, any ounce of being mean or anything, throw it out the door. Because you already know the conversation so wildly different. So go in open-minded, the soft heart with listening ears and a good attitude. And honestly, patience. Because have you ever been in a conversation with someone where you're like, you want to jump in? You're just like, I really want to. Guys, I have that all the time when I'm hanging out with you guys or whoever, my coworkers, and I'm like, hey, like, I just need to chill. I just need to wait. And I finally had someone where like, hey, like, just need to butt out. And I was like, okay, like, message received. But that was at one point where I was like, okay, I need to have patience. And that was with conversations with coworkers of mine that we see eye to eye on everything. So yeah, what else when having conversations like this would you say?
Again, with the open-minded is that you have to realize, and it took me a little bit to realize this, is that most of them grew up in this religion, so they don't know anything else, and it's not weird or different to them. So they see nothing wrong with it. So you can't really go in and be like, oh, you guys are like crazy, you're different, you're weird, because to them it's normal. Like they've grew up in that church, going to their Sunday schools, doing all that stuff. So it's not different for them.
Yeah, and there's probably a good handful of us in this room that have grown up the same way. I grew up in church, and so for a while it's what I knew because it's what I did. It was what my family did. I went to a private Christian school. It's just what it was. But it wasn't until I said, no, I'm going to take a grasp on this for myself. I'm going to fully understand what's going on, and I'm going to make my own decisions. You gotta know what you're going into, and just be loving. You're never ever gonna win somebody to Jesus by being like upfront, pushy, whatever. You just gotta love them. Like, it sounds so cheesy, but you're gonna win someone to Jesus by loving them. They're gonna be like, hey, well, you act like this. You probably wasn't in love. Or, hey, you talk about this, but then you live like this. That's not who you say your Jesus is. You can't have that conversation and not expect some rebuttal. Pastor Lynn even talked about that this morning. That we need to have conversations about open and honest things. But guys, there's been times where I'm like, hey, I gotta get this point across to this person. And it could be anything. Take Mormonism out of it for a second. But I've had to realize, like, hey, if they're in a whole different book, we're never gonna be on the same page. So there's a point to be in community with them, love them, but there's no point of trying to get page. If you're in a whole different book. So how you live your life and you meet people, that are Muslim, Mormonism, whatever it is, you're going to meet people at all different walks of life. People that are like, hey, I'm just open to the idea of church, or hey, I've heard of a God. Talk to people. Any closing ideas or someone that you would give advice for someone that's in a community and you have Mormon friends?
I do, yeah. I think just asking questions, it really helped me. Like, even if I wasn't doing this, I wouldn't have asked any questions, and I learned a lot through them, because you can only learn so much through the internet. So I think having a heart-to-heart with someone about their religion, Mormonism, whatever it may be, but just listening and asking questions for clarification. Like, I found out more about their Jesus because he's not the same as mine. So I think there's a lot to talking to someone and asking questions and just being able to listen.
Yeah, no, that's good. This is the week 5 of 5, and it's literally a huge blessing just to be able to have these conversations. And a lot of places don't talk about things like this. But I'm so glad, most of you that have been here all month, if this is your first time here today, I'm so glad you're here. It's Halloween, which means November is tomorrow, which is crazy, and we have an awesome month-long of conversations next week, starting next Sunday. But let's just pray. We're going to hang out and have a good time. Dear God, just thank you so much for tonight.